I'm Mark Tilden. My wife, Roseanne, and I live in Gig Harbor, which is a beautiful little harbor town about 8 or 10 miles west of Tacoma. The specific context that Roseanne and I lead a missional community in is an east part of the old downtown Gig Harbor. And it's largely composed of people in our age bracket, kind of 50s and 60s. Many of them retired, certainly not all. And many of them professionals, either own small businesses or have worked in some kind of professional environment. But again, with a mix of commercial fishermen and sort of more blue-collar folks. Because they're in our generation, a lot of them have had some kind of church experience. Many of them have written off the church as kind of irrelevant or been hurt by it. So when we first moved to Tacoma about 7 years ago, one of our first questions as we got introduced to Soma and this missional life was how it would work in a more urban or suburban, sort of middle and upper middle class kind of context. Because at that time, most of the missional communities in Tacoma were in an urban context and they were younger people. And so there were definitely some things that we felt were going to need to change. And there have been challenges. We considered moving into Tacoma just to learn what it was like, but Jeff encouraged us to stay in Gig Harbor where God had planted us. And there have been challenges because wealth tends to dull people's sensitivity to their spiritual poverty. But we've found that people respond to the gospel and to love in every context. Probably one of the biggest struggles we've faced in planting and multiplying missional communities in Gig Harbor has been really just learning to die to self. We're fundamentally selfish people, and sometimes we don't believe that what Jesus said is true, that if we lay down our lives for his sake in the gospel, that we'll actually find life. And yet, we found that as we do that, as we choose to lay down our lives and love people sacrificially, we actually do find life. And I mentioned another struggle a little bit earlier, that sometimes wealth has a tendency to dull people's sensitivity to their spiritual poverty. And yet, there again, people respond to love and the gospel in any context. And so we have learned that we can reach out to those people and love them sacrificially by asking God how to love them in practical ways that matter to them. God has very graciously given us tremendous favor with our neighbors in Gig Harbor, largely through a set of parties that have kind of become a rhythm in our neighborhood as we throw usually 3 neighborhood parties each year. And in fact, neighbors have begun to invite other neighbors just because we've encouraged them to. And those parties are a platform for us to build relationships, have people in our homes for dinner, and even extend that to doing vacations together. Roseanne and I have a boat that we often like to cruise in the beautiful areas of the San Juan Islands and farther north. And we take neighbors with us so that we can spend concentrated time with them and hear their stories and begin to know them in a more in-depth way. I think there are 3 key things that God has taught us over the last few years in building and multiplying missional communities in Gig Harbor. First is that we believe that we really have to love the people that God's called us to. This is a lifestyle of laying down your life for people. And if we don't love the people that we're called to, that's going to be very difficult to do. And so, first and foremost, we have to ask the Spirit of God to break our hearts for people, that we would love them in such a way that laying down our life and sacrificing for them would be easy because we love them. And perhaps the second is that missional life is not something you can add to a busy life schedule. I think so many times people come to us, especially in our context, who have church backgrounds, and they're looking for some content or program or something special we do in missional community. And we have to tell them that this is about a lifestyle of organizing all of life around loving people and around showing them how the gospel looks in daily life. I think Tim Chester said it best when he said that this is ordinary life with gospel intentionality. And then finally, We believe that we're in it for the long haul. We believe that Jesus called us to make disciples, not converts. And that's a long-term process. And while I wish we saw more immediate fruit in our neighborhood, and hopefully God will continue to provide more fruit, we believe that God's called us in the long haul to model to people and to lead them to Jesus, to become disciples who can make disciples.